Ithinar's Bloom by H. Jane Harrington. Chapter 13. The Bottom of the World. We know our friends best when we're companioned with death. Master Kezias. Vaughn shook Kier with a greater force than he'd intended, but she remained unresponsive. Kier, wake up, Vaughn commanded. Finally, she stirred slightly and her eyes fluttered open. Stick, you okay? Relief washed over him, and he leaned back against the wall, trying to calm his rattled heart. He inhaled a shaky breath. I'm okay, but I was wondering the same about you. Kier nodded wearily. I'm fine. Is it morning already? Feels like I just fell asleep. I know, the night escaped me too. I think we should go find a healer. Kier closed her eyes and snuggled into her pillow. Later. Too sleepy now. Vaughn studied her indecisively. He did not want to argue, but she was obviously in need of healing. She did not seem willing to budge from her warm and comfortable bed, yet the fatigue was certainly a product of her injuries, and she shouldn't be mobile anyway, Vaughn reasoned. After dressing quickly, Vaughn crept to Kier's side and eased her short sword from under the pillow where she had wedged it for easy access. He replaced it with the guardian sword. In the unlikely event that she would need a weapon, at least there would be something handy. He tucked the short sword into his belt and slipped out the door. As Vaughn made his way down the streets, he felt strangely vulnerable. The feeling clung annoyingly to the back of his awareness and nagged as though he had left something important behind. He had never experienced a sensation so intense, even when he would slip away from home to explore a new town. He had the urge to return to Kier's side even when she was sound asleep. Was this a function of the guardian magic? Vaughn wondered. Perhaps the magic was designed to discourage guardian and guarded from separating. He would have to ask Inabagor about that sometime, if he ever saw him again. The area grew increasingly destitute as Vaughn navigated the streets beyond the dock. The warehouse district had become a haven for the homeless, and several ragged men approached to beg for money. Furtive shadows lurked in dark alleys as Vaughn passed. A bedraggled, toothless prostitute tugged on his arm. A sickly, wild look in her eye gave him pause before he wrenched himself free. The gods are men! Men are gods! A guttural voice called from below. Vaughn sidestepped the wizened old man, tattered and broken at his feet. The man reeked of spirits and want of libation. He rambled incoherently, but when his eyes met Vaughn's, he seemed to sober. They don't want us to know, but I know. I talk to them. I do. I know the truth the priests won't say. Hustling by, Vaughn tried to ignore the delirious utterances. Long after he'd passed by, Vaughn could still hear the man shouting, Lesser men waxing! Magic is obsolete! Magic is usefulness outlived, merely vestigial ability. A new age ascends, noble one. Yours is a dying breed, and my people rise, the next rung on the ladder of man. Vaughn had little experience in such districts, as he'd always managed to successfully avoid them. They were not comfortable places to be for the unarmed, and Vaughn was not very good with a weapon. Inagor had tried to teach him to wield a sword, but he exhibited no talent for the craft and had hastily abandoned his training sessions. Still, he kept his hand on Kier's short sword, ready to produce it in the event of trouble. When he finally spied a master healer's sign hanging from the eave of a dilapidated establishment, Vaughn expelled the tension on his chest. He pushed the door open and was surprised to find the parlor room packed with people. They crowded the floors, some sleeping under ragged blankets, others holding screaming infants. Vaughn's stomach turned at the stench of the room, and he forced down the bile rising in the back of his throat. Many of the patients were pale and sickly, feverish and thin. You look healthy enough, young master, a man spoke beside him. What manner of ailment brings a fit young man like you to the festering boil on the ass of hell? Vaughn turned toward the voice, which belonged to an elder gentleman standing near the doorway. Ragged clothes clung desperately to his malnourished, leathery body. Unlike his withering bones, his eyes were keen and alert. The man was leaning on a weathered cane, shivering noticeably. Oh, I suffer no ailment, sir. I seek aid to a friend. Well, I doubt you'll have much luck here, I'm sorry to say. I know of another master healer, a very capable fellow, worth every lorn he charges. And he charges quite a few. Hence the reason you see me standing amongst this unfortunate rabble, rather than sipping tea in his office. You'd be sure to gain his services, if you can afford it. The man offered a bony hand in greeting. They call me Gavin, or they used to, when anyone cared to call me at all. Vaughn accepted the handshake and introduced himself. Excuse me, Master Gavin, but what manner of suffering ails these people? There are so many. This lot here? The ravage has come to take hold in Lower Southport, lad. These poor bastards come here to wither and die, waiting for treatment from an overworked healer who will likely never have mana enough to get to them, Gavin said. Vaughn was aghast. But why doesn't King Saventine send healers here? Surely this disease can be managed with enough of them. Gavin laughed. What part of Septari are you from, boy? The Crown cares nothing for us cretins at the bottom of the barrel. Why ever would they send healers here? Vaughn shook his head, watching a frail mother trying weakly to suckle a crying baby at her breast. It seemed outrageously preposterous. The Lauren Navy had scores of healers, surely sitting around playing dice at that very moment. A simple order from the king could divert them to combat such an epidemic. There had been no sea conquests in many years, and the Navy, long ago the proud jewel of the kingdom, was now relegated to fighting pirates and rescuing stranded fishermen. Years of the Crown's neglect had found the Navy growing fat and lazy in the peace. Gavin eased toward Vaughn and leaned in to quiet his volume. Are you lost, young master? You're a sunflower in a weed patch here. A man with soft hands should hide them in this part of the world. Vaughn nodded absently and shoved his hands into his pockets. The man chuckled. Quite the literal lad, aren't you? Well, when you walk the mean streets, you should look like you belong. And you don't. Kyr's voice echoed in Vaughn's head. Be the people. He sighed despondently. I know, but I'm clinging to the fringe of desperation. Does this healer do house calls? Gavin chuckled. Gavin's chuckle turned into a belly laugh. Look around you, lad. What does your educated brain tell you? Then, might you kindly point me in the direction to the healer about whom you spoke? The old man was silent for a moment, considering Vaughn's question. Well, it's not an easy path from here. I would only get you lost in the telling. Vaughn was not dissuaded. Very well. Lead me there, and I will happily pay for any treatment you require. Gavin's eyes lit up, and his bushy eyebrows bobbed. Well, now, sometimes a wayward mistress of fortune comes a-callin', even if only to tease. Vaughn started toward the door, but Gavin held his cane out to block Vaughn's path. Not that way, lad. I've lived in the streets long enough to know its ways. 2 men will await you outside that door, and at least 1 in the far alley. Vaughn's heart leapt into his throat. Shadow mages? Gavin snorted as if reading Vaughn's mind. Oh, don't worry. They're just garden-variety brigands who like the color of your purse. Luckily, they're as dumb as they are greedy. Do you by chance have a few spare coins on your person? Vaughn raised a suspicious eyebrow. Why? Because they might procure us a lovely diversion. Gavin's mouth opened wide in a toothless grin. He nodded toward a buxom, scantily clad woman standing behind Vaughn and hobbled toward her. Watch and learn, lad.